about specifically autism spectrum disorder. But today you're going to earn something. You're going to earn a sticker within the next hour, and this sticker is going to be an icon wherever you want to put that, be it your office door, your laptop, your planner, where people can know that after today's training you've really learned something about what autism is and how to best communicate with somebody that has autism. I'd like for this to be as informal as possible, regardless of the videotaping and sharing. And so I wanted to assess sort of your experience, if anyone wants to share about why they came today, aside from this is what I'm supposed to do on Tuesday at 10:30, and to see my friends, because I do feel like it's a community of people that know one another pretty well, and I was excited to see some familiar faces today too. But why are you here? Tell me anything you know about autism.
I'm very interested in the detection early and what progress has been made since we first heard autism. It was just a desperate situation, and now it seems like autism children, as they grow to adulthood, are doing many jobs and many functions.
Yes. I'm going to touch on all three of those things. From a little bit about early detection. I'm not a diagnostician, but I do have a lot of experience in employing people with autism. And so we're going to talk about that progress, and we're going to talk about that transition from, I just got a diagnosis, does that mean my son is going to be Rain Man?
Right.
And how that's shaped through the years since 1988, I think is when the movie came out. But anybody know Dr. Ruth Sullivan?
Yes.
I was hoping that she didn't live here. Because when my colleagues asked me what I was doing today, I said I get to do allies training at the Woodlands. They were like, is that where Ruth lives? And I immediately thought, oh, I'll be so embarrassed because she truly is the reason that I'm standing here today. Dr. Sullivan was the pioneer.
Yes.
Truly. And it was fight the legislature, do what I need to do to get what I need for my son, just like most parents would, correct? But I'm going to touch on a few things that you said. Anyone else?
I worked for Ruth Sullivan.
Oh, wonderful.
From 1976 to 79, the Information and Referral Service.
Yes.
When it was here. And it was absolutely fascinating. She is a dynamo. She's at Wingate now.
Wingate. I knew it was a W,
Yeah.
and I thought.
And
I think she's 93
she's
now.
95, 96 years old. So she's not the old Ruth Sullivan, but she's still pretty tough.
Yes.
But at the time we were working, lots of people were just getting a diagnosis. And it was pretty disastrous then because nobody knew how to teach the kids.
Right.
And she was very much involved in the education programs that have really made a big difference, as you know.
Yes.
And in establishing both centers for autism in Huntington, which is really a worldwide center. We have people who come to Huntington because of the autism treatment. But it's so interesting to me that there is so much increase in the number of autistic diagnoses.
We're at
and
1 in
the
59
range.
now. 1 in 59
And
births.
there's so many people that we have caught on. And probably are someone on the spectrum.
I want to mention something about that, if that's okay, and then I'll definitely to you. The 1 in 59 is the new prevalence rate for new births, people that will have autism spectrum disorder in some capacity. And we'll talk about what that means. But nearly half of those individuals have average to above average intellect. That's a critical component when you're talking about people about employment, when you're talking about getting into college, when you're talking about teaching people with autism. The intellect is typically there. It's the communication and social dynamics. It's the understanding of relationships. It's the give and take in dialogue that really are problematic. And time management skills, executive functioning, those are sort of the challenges that we help to support now. So thanks for sharing your
I have
history.
to tell you one comment, though. I went to a conference in about 1979, and they had a couple of adult autistic men. One of them talked a lot. The other one said about that one, he's so endless.
The thing is, did he get it? A lot of times, just give me the information. And I'm glad you mentioned that too, because people with autism, many are nonverbal, many are verbal. But people that are nonverbal don't not communicate. They communicate in a lot of different ways, just maybe not the way that you or I might. So we're going to compare those things. Yes?
What does actually, well, let me tell you where I come from. Over 50 years ago, I was speech pathology class at WVU, and
It's okay.
I heard the word, yeah, it's okay. I heard the word autistic.
Yep.
We were looking through double glass mirror thing, and a student who was, I don't know whether she was a student, but she was, she had been diagnosed as autistic and was being seen by the speech pathology people. And the class I was in was an early speech pathology class, and the word autism or autistic was, we had never heard it before.
It's the A word.
And I remember thinking that, you know, what, now wonder where we were on the spectrum at that time, because it must have been the very beginning. And I remember thinking that someone in the class said, whether it was the professor, I don't remember, said oftentimes autistic children were finding more than 50 years ago, that they're often the product or the children of two very intelligent people. We're finding that a father who is a chemist and a mother who has a PhD in education, you know, just, is any of that still, I mean, I know we've come a long way.
Yeah, I think we're still at an 80% male diagnosis today in terms of those 1 in 59, 80% of them will be men. And a lot of people say that's because women can mask their emotions. We're trained to be put on the shyness thing, right? So the underdiagnosis of women is still happening. There's a lot of progress in that area. But in terms of causes or cures, that's not what I'm in the business of. But the causes, I did spend a lot of time. I started in the training center in 2004. And my role then in graduate school was to do new intakes and talk to families about people who just got a diagnosis. And at that time, truly, I thought the MMR was a pretty big deal. And then I married a physician, and he didn't think that it was true at all. And then we had children, and so that was a fun discussion. But I was during that time of hearing the calls of, my child is immobile now, we just got that vaccine, it must have been what Jenny McCarthy said, right? Misled a lot of people, still to this day. So they removed the thimerosal, we made progress there, talking about, okay, that wasn't the cause, maybe it was environmental, because the prevalence rates in New Jersey, which the environment, I've been to New Jersey and smell anything, was not super pleasant. I was born there, so I guess I could talk about it. But environmental challenges, we saw some more increased rates there. Genetics definitely play a key role, specifically from the father, you would presume. But the intellect thing you mentioned is, I don't know how relevant that is in terms of IQ and autism. But I'll share what I do know today, and I appreciate the context of where you've come from, especially speech therapists. The college program there at Marshall, I get to oversee that program. We have one at Shepherd University and Concord University. And I get to work with a lot of grad students from different fields, predominantly speech pathology, counseling, psychology, people that are going to be PsyDs, educators, and we've had a few in business school. And we hire them because it's a clinical placement where they can have access to supporting over 50 students with autism at Marshall. So that's sort of where I've been in terms of experience of autism, definitely more so with adults. But today, I'm going to kind of try to go quickly through a lot of this, just in essence of time, because I feel like our dialogue could really yield the best results for your learning today. But you will be earning these. And so let's kind of talk through this present. And I'll share a couple of videos with you too. But yeah, so this is back in 2002 when the college program actually began. So if you Google autism in college, Marshall University is going to come up as one of the top 3 schools. We're super proud of that, but it's not rocket science what we're doing. It's Ruth Sullivan saying, okay, what do I do next? How do I talk to the professor? How do I clean the dorm room? How do I still figure out laundry and all of those sorts of things? And taking on that role, bridging that gap for families between especially high school and college, and now a huge emphasis in the transition to employment. Degree seeking, degree holding students from every college at Marshall. I think there's 11 still. So we're not seeing just people that are good at science, technology, engineering, and math. We're seeing people that love history, that love teaching, that want to get married, that want to have children, that don't know the proper distance to sit in a room in this setting, that can't understand context, which is the theory of mind piece we're going to talk about. The things that I'm saying, are they resonating at all with you in terms of people you're thinking about or that you know of that either have been diagnosed with autism or have autism yourself? Yes?
The other thing I got to say is that from my perspective, from working as a school psychologist in Campbell County Schools, we had a wide variety of children, whatever the case. We had from being Asperger's, whatever the case, to being very severe autistic, whatever like this, and having a lot of different types of personality characteristic things that was really there was issues for them, whatever like this, to work through, whatever like this, and of course, and you got to see the side of the training where best it was to deal with the academic part of it, and then you got to see the side where best it dealt with housekeeping skills, social skills, whatever it is. And from what I'm kind of picking up on you, you're talking about a lot of students that we would classify as being Asperger's going into college, whatever. Yes. So like I said, you're kind of bridging the gap here for me.
Oh, good.
Like this.
Awesome. Yes, and now it would be ASD level 1 for what that means. We're going to talk about that on the DSM. But you're exactly right. These are the folks that I'm talking about often. Under the radar people that are either really obvious, meaning overt in their behaviors, maybe not understanding sarcasm, could be even perceived as rude in a classroom, might be self-injurious, have a lot of stimming behaviors. But those could still be folks that have Asperger's. And so we'll talk about that transition of Asperger's to what ASD is here throughout these
and
slides.
sometimes it's very, very hard to even observe it, trying to pinpoint that you are Asperger's, because I worked with a child once, and then I finally caught on to the fact when he was talking to his mother and that he wanted to feel her hair and play with her hair, and she says, no, you can't do that, because everybody was saying, he's not he's not autistic, da 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 da. And I said, look, if that's not, I said, I don't know what is, but of course, who listens to the schools?
I do. I read reports. I had some handouts in the back if anybody needs a visual to read later, even if you want to kind of talk through what this training is, since I'm not sure how much time we'll have at the end. But today we're really just going to have a general discussion. This isn't the let's figure out Johnny's behaviors and cure the world today. But it is more of a conversation to really understand what it means to be an ally. When you think of that word ally, you think of safe environment, you think of an icon that I can see and know as a safe space for me. I want to express the difference between the education system, especially, in that gap of what non-specialized classrooms are, higher education especially, full-time employment. This is the new norm, okay? We have lots of resources and professionals in the field that know a lot about transitioning people into adulthood that have autism. And yes, for the purposes of today, I traditionally talk about Asperger's just because that's what I'm knowledgeable about. But it's like any other goal. When you first get the diagnosis, let's say back in the early 80s, it's, okay, am I going to make it through kindergarten? Or the doctor told me that they'll never graduate high school, don't think about college. But now I have the pleasure of talking to families and helping them transition into living in the residence halls and getting an apartment or having their first date. We can be that new unbiased person that can help take a little load off the parents and more accountability and understanding of skill development for the individual. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. I'm used to having some sort of clicker, so I'm like, oh, I don't like this. All right, so here's the DSM change, all right? 2013, it was at the time I was writing a dissertation, so it was really hard because they changed the DSM. Right? Autism Spectrum Disorder or Asperger's Disorder. Asperger's Disorder was removed. And this was a really hard time, at least from the perspective of people with autism that had Asperger's. Many would come to my office and say, I feel like they're taking my identity away, and I don't like it. So people are sitting around a table and deciding about my life, right? They're also college students who are fighting the man, but it was removed. And so now we have this severity level. So if you go to get a diagnosis today and you see a clinical psychologist or a school counselor, well, it wouldn't be a school counselor, it'd be a PsyD. You'd want to receive a clinical diagnosis. If you're referring someone now that needs a new one, the Division of Rehabilitation Services is a great resource for people to even have access to getting a new psychological evaluation. But the new severity levels are 1, 2, and 3. 1 is requiring support. So these are our former Asperger's folks, all right? Severity level 3 means I need substantial support in my daily life to function. All right, so thinking about independent living skill tasks, thinking about executive functioning skills. So that's how the new DSM reads. People familiar what DSM stands for? Diagnostic Statistics Manual, I think.
Yeah.
But now we're in number 5. So they change them typically every 7 years. I think there could be an addendum. But so expect that the diagnosis might change. What we have seen though is that dual diagnoses of social anxiety, general anxiety disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, depressive disorder, all are typical. ADHD, some learning differences exist for a lot of people that have autism. Many don't. A lot of people take medications, a lot of people don't. The predominant, and I'm just going to give general statistics from my experience, but majority of our students do take some sort of antidepressant or some sort of attention focus medication, be it Adderall or whatever. We don't distribute medications at Marshall University. So then, what does that mean the student has to do?
They got to take it on.
Remember to take medication. Figure that out. Is it mom or dad who's filling the pill box every week? Is it, and I'm going to say Johnny for just because, is Johnny wanting to take that medication? Because once mom or dad are not filling it up and he's living in the dorms on his own, is he going to take it? That's a big gap in functioning. And so we have to learn the new normal. Do I value this medication for my life? Do I value this therapy in terms of a specific problem? Am I still going to go to church? Am I still going to vote? What's sexual health look like to me? Because I'm transitioning out of the home and I'm transitioning to this environment that's not predictable. Whereas high school, I'm in high school every day. Okay, so we are talking, I know a lot about that kind of transition, so think if you have questions about that. But you're going to see 3 predominant things. If you get a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, you're definitely going to have a persistent deficit in social communication and social interaction. Here's a couple examples. When you go with your friends on a trip, who pays for gas? You guys have been on trips with your friends, right?
Oh, that's a real, you wanted an answer.
I want an answer. Who's paying for the gas? Not driving. I'm not the driver. Share it. Okay. What do y'all do?
Well, sometimes you just pay for it yourself.
Passengers pay. Who taught you all that skill? Mom and dad. You knew it maybe just innately because you're neurotypicals. Social emotional reciprocity. That means the give and take and understanding. Well, if I'm going with a group for a church event and we're traveling out of town, am I the one always asked to buy pizza, or am I the one always expected? That's vulnerability of autism, not understanding social context. These are the skills that we teach. So we talk about it. We say, okay, well, what you got coming up, Johnny? I'm going on a trip with my friends. Where are you going? I don't know how to get there, what I'm going to wear, how to pack. Those are the questions that we start asking. They sound sort of like mom or dad questions, but Johnny's now an adult living on campus, right? But these can be taught. Let's move on to the second one you're going to see in some capacity. The normal back and forth in conversation. You ever talk to somebody that you know has autism and all they want to talk about is robotics and not stop talking about robotics and not understand that you're sick of talking about robotics? Yeah. They might not understand the personal space and appropriate distance between people and dialogue. That's social, emotional kind of stuff. Nonverbal communication. When somebody's in your office and you're sick of talking to them, what do?
Stand up.
Stand up.
Yeah.
You know, at this next meeting, understanding that those nonverbals, they might not be picked up. Typically people with autism that I've worked with enjoy the information. Just tell me it's 2 o'clock and it's time to leave, and I'll see you tomorrow at 2 o'clock, or I'll see you next week, or predict the routine for me so I can understand how I should communicate with you in that environment. Just tell me. Right? Deficits in hygiene. This is a big one for me today. Because I thought, okay, who am I getting to talk to? What do I need to do? I was concerned about dry shampoo versus not washing my hair or not. I was worried about those things because I knew the social context that I needed to have decent hygiene to give a talk, right? But people with autism, that's a social function. That's an executive functioning of know, what do I have to do today? What can I wear to class? Can I roll up in my pajamas? How am I building a reputation based off of who I'm around and how I'm behaving? These are learned skills. You're seeing deficits in people that have autism in some area in this. Others are quite social, hyper-social even. So that's why it's so hard to pick out. Well, Johnny has great social skills. You know, he's dating, he's got great grades, but the social anxiety, the constant comparison, the lack of understanding really are problematic. So you're going to see some adjustments of behavior to fit the context. How do I make friends? Who taught you how to make friends?
Parents.
You made you have any friends in here?
School.
Kindergarten? Ooh, nice.
Church.
I had worked with a girl who had her first slumber party when she was 21. Oh my goodness. And I thought, what are you doing this weekend? Oh, they invited me to stay overnight. It was in the dorm, and a bunch of girls or whatever. It's like, oh, you've never had a slumber party? She said, no, what happens? So I had to explain all of that. It was a fun meeting. But because not understanding, not maybe being invited, because of not understanding, hey, I hate singing happy birthday, so they're just going to quit inviting me because the happy birthday song really triggers my autism and I have to run out of there. Or just tell them not to sing happy birthday when you're around, if you want their presence. So sometimes it's not rocket science, it's just communication in a confidential and kind of more humanistic way. All right, so you're going to see deficits there. I'm probably going way too slow, so somebody will have to keep me on time here. Love it a lot. You all stayed on me? Awesome. Okay, eye contact's an example of that. Understanding facial expressions. What do you guys notice about this photo?
We're in a world of their own.
What's going on there?
Nothing.
Not much space for anything there. This guy over here is maybe stimming a little bit, right? There's some fidgeting happening here. This guy's wondering, oh, is that a cute girl over there? And there's lots of space here. When you go to sit on the bench outside, do you sit right next to somebody that's already taken up that bench? No, who taught you that? It's a social norm, right? Which bathroom stall do you use if you're in a men's room? I don't personally know unless you're at a country concert or something. But nobody teaches you which urinal to use if you're a boy. Or else maybe your dad does, and you talk about, okay, this is the distance you're supposed to have. That's a learned skill. It's a social skill, but it's a learned skill. All right, so these three folks, they're exhibiting some characteristics, right? What else are we going to see? Restricted repetitive patterns of behavior. There's special interests. Johnny just loves trains, right? He's going to love trains all his life. Maybe, maybe not. It might change dinosaurs. It might change the mathematics. Let's hope it changes to something employable. Right. Stemming, the flapping, yep. When you get there. Yep. Stereotype repetitive motor movements. Maybe talking too loud and not recognizing that. We're going to talk a little bit about sensory challenges. Insistence on sameness and adherence to routines. What do y'all do when your routine gets messed up? Like today, it's raining out.
I gripe about it.
Didn't change it, right? But I still like it.
You just have to drop back and punt. That's why I always coach you go from plan A to plan B.
That's right.
Sometimes.
But if plan B is not there, I'm not going to plan C. If the textbook isn't in the library, I'm not going to class because I'm ill prepared. Okay? And you wonder where those challenges start happening. So you become more predictable on, okay, what's Johnny's behavior like? What's the pattern? Can I help him overcome the fear of thunderstorms? Because it's a true fear. Can I help him email a professor about missing class? That's advocacy. So these kind of things, when our routine's messed up, we have the resilience, we have the skill set to press on. But folks with autism might be, okay, that's it for the day. It's raining, so I'm not going to go to class. because I truly am fearful of the weather. Well, that's not going to be an excuse for the professor. Here's what we have to do, etc. And I use context of college because that's kind of the life experience I have. But here's a couple examples. You guys have any examples of fixed interests that you know of people that you know that have autism? That would spend all day long doing it if they could.
Legos and listening to audio history on World War II at the same time.
Reading obituaries.
Reading obituary.
The dancer at the Marshall basketball camps, down by the dam.
Yeah, it's predictable. If they lose, maybe not so much. We can work on that. The Legos are predictable, right? I can line them up the way I want, same as here. What happens when you're reading a book on World War II weaponry in your German history class? What do you look like then in college? Scary? Yeah. We had that happen. His fixed interest was World War II weaponry. Want to know everything about guns. I wouldn't hurt a fly. Wouldn't know what hurt a fly meant either. But David, he's since graduated. But he was not happy when the professor said, you can't read your World War II books in my class, your peers are scared of you. You know, and this was right after Virginia Tech had happened. And so then we got to educate everyone about how his reputation was being perceived, where he could read certain books about what. He also was interested in things that were inappropriate to do in a public environment in terms of drawings and things. And so we had to educate him on, what do I look like when I'm with my professor? How am I being perceived by others? Am I scaring my peers unintentionally? You know? So those fixed interests move into adulthood, and they might change. I had one guy that was really interested in trains, actually. Here at Amtrak, he would video the trains coming in at midnight. You know, the train's always late. And I saw him over there, and I said, what are you doing? He's like, I'm fascinated with YouTube videos of trains. And so I'm going to take a video of it. But my immediate thought, had I not known him, was, who's this guy videoing our train system at midnight in Huntington? But because I'm an ally, and I knew him, and knew his fixed interests, all is well. But our role here, especially in the Huntington area, is to educate the public on what that might look like and what could happen to him. You know, police officer coming up, that's a new training with law enforcement, right? Understanding the signs of having autism. And I can go off track with that, but the fixated interest can sometimes cause problems. Okay, sensory issues. Anybody? That's usually pretty common. Folks know that a lot of people with autism struggle with bright lights, sensitivity to sound. It might be vestibular type issues, proprioceptive issues, meaning off balance, seeming clumsy, hypo or hypersensitivity or reactivity to certain environments. It could be trying to study on white paper and really needing for it to be blue or green. Dimmed lights, we have like light covers in our rooms. Sensitivity to noise in the dorms, the walls are thin. How am I going to compensate for that? How am I going to sleep at night with earplugs? Am I going to transition my room at home into what I need it to be as an apartment with a roommate or not, etc. Thinking about these questions now. Okay, so despite all the things that I just talked about, there's three kind of areas. We might have repetitive interest in a certain area. We're going to have trouble with social communication in some capacity. We're going to struggle with executive functioning and time management. So although these are a lot of the challenges, there's a lot of myths that exist with autism still. Like you mentioned the A word. Okay, well, what's the view of autism in today's society, especially within our community? Let's learn a couple practical ways to interact with people that we may know that have autism or are seeking out a diagnosis. Who knows what theory of mind is? I didn't know what it meant when I first started. But it's that idea that I'm not going to understand what the other person's thinking. I'm not understanding body language. If they can't see them, if I can't see them, they can't see me. It's called mind blindness because it's predicting what the other person's thinking in some capacity, or presuming that you're thinking the same thing, right? This is where I come to vote. So when I come here, I'm in a different capacity, right? I think about what I'm talking about. I'm not going to presume that because I came in the room again, it's totally changed and it's used for something else. I have the ability to say, okay, everybody's gonna have different beliefs in here, and I gotta watch what I'm saying, but somebody with autism might just presume that you believe the same thing, especially political kind of things, a wide variety of topics. But let's look at this practically, in terms of even a kid. Dylan's calling his dad and he's saying, Dad's at work. What are you doing? I'm just playing with this. Duh, you called me at noon. You know that's my time to play with trains. Mom's cooking, right? But Dad didn't know the context of what was going on. He's at work. He didn't think about it being noon. But theory of mind is really just not understanding context in some way. Breaking the stereotype that it's no longer Rain Man. Let's talk through that for a minute. You ever go to a movie and you guys have different thoughts on how that movie went? Someone with autism might presume, we just watched the same movie together. You know, you didn't think the same thing. Okay, Rain Man, 1988 is what it was. What does that show you? Let's look at the differences here. And I'm stealing this from Dr. Mark Ellison, so since we're being recorded, I'll quote him. But take a look at Dustin Hoffman here, regardless of what you think about him. Does he care about what he's looking like?
No, no.
Is that the same thing he wore yesterday?
Probably.
Now, when you see Tom over there, what do you think about Tom?
Well, he's very
Before he whacked out. He's a cool cat, right? He's got that, the social context of I'm doing this. Everybody seen the movie?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Alex Weinman, it's the new face of autism, and this is back in 2012. Young woman who cared nothing about beauty queen stuff, but cared a lot about Asperger's syndrome. And showing that she's a woman who can still, you know, participate in a competition, can care about what other people think, and use that to win Miss Montana. Right? That's her platform. But what we want to do is express what's the differences between these years in terms of prevalence, in terms of social awareness and understanding mainly. I think the education, the increase for the prevalence has happened because we're educating one another. People are seeking out diagnoses at a more advanced rate. Access to resources are better. We're still studying it. But the increase, I think, we're here, we were 1 in 10,000, something like that. So major change. I'm going to skip through this sensory part just because I want to show you the video on employment. But how can we be an ally? Let's talk about stimming behaviors. What have you guys been doing during this just past hour or so, whenever we've been talking? 40 minutes. What have you been doing to pay attention? You're all actually quite listening. Nerve-wracking. Usually Jackie's like, tell me if somebody falls asleep. My professor used to fall asleep.
I've been thinking about my nephew,
Yep.
who's now a young adult,
Mhm.
and the different little phases that he's been through. I remember him being mesmerized by fire as a little one. And it was a worry for the
Sure,
parents.
it's a safety concern.
Yeah. Oh, he was just,
Was it the light or the heat?
or neither, it was
Interesting.
yeah.
Well, and that's, you're in context, you're thinking about what we're talking about. But you ever kind of get bored when somebody's talking a lot and you might twirl your hair, or doodle, text? Nobody's texting you, this is wild. It's like, oh, this is great. But why do we do those things? Why do we maybe, I don't know, before I came in here, I went to the bathroom, made sure I was kind of put together a little bit. I knew Beth Calvert was coming, and she's a counselor of mine, and I respect her gratefully. And so I thought, I want to make sure I'm on my A game. And then I see other people that I really admire too, and first here, I'm doing this for Beth, I do what she says, so I get kind of nervous. So what do? I go to the bathroom. I use the bathroom, right? You can always use the bathroom as an excuse for getting it together. But other times, you can't. You might need to pace, I didn't want to stand here and use this. The lights are a little bit bright, but you adjust. Those are all accommodations for people that might have social anxiety, right? But also might have autism. And so the stimming might look like this for somebody with autism, right? It might look like stress ball. I didn't bring one with me, but it might be a stress ball. I support a young woman that used to be like a old sock that she liked to just, it's a sensory thing for her. But when you're rubbing an old sock in class as a young woman, you look kind of odd. Let's switch it to a stress ball. Let's switch it to a fidget that might be more discreet. Had a kid that was doing the Rubik's Cube all the time. The Rubik's Cube's really loud, but he could do it quickly. And that was his thing. But you can't do a Rubik's Cube loudly in class when an educator's trying to teach. You might need to step out for that. So how can we adjust the needs for him and the needs for the peers at the same time? So those are all kind of stemming examples, right? Self-talk, echolalia. Anybody ever heard what echolalia is? Saying the same thing over and over? Why do people do that? Common. It's routine, it's predictable. When it's internal, it's even harder sometimes.
Is that with the echolalia where people repeat what's been said by other people?
Can be. Yeah. Can be. I'm going to give an example of that too here in just a minute. Do you have an example, other examples of what's repeated? Echolalia? What do you keep saying? What does the child keep saying?
Oh, it's just like if somebody said, hey, let's go play dolls, then it will be, oh, let's go play dolls.
Repeating what the thing one just
Yes.
was. Yeah. Is that checking for understanding? You think in some capacity? I don't know, but it's repeating what I was just instructed to do or asked to do in some way. When I think of echolalia, I think of, this is going to be a terrible example, but internal echolalia. I had a young man that if he was getting excited, he would kind of laugh or like put his hands to his face. And he didn't like that, but he couldn't control it. And so he would think in his head, okay, dead puppies, dead puppies. Dead puppies. Why are we talking about dead puppies? It's terrible. He's like, well, it makes me take my mind off of what my behavior is, and I know it's something bad, so I know I need to calm down.
Is it a rubber band?
Can be a rubber band. Sure, that's a great discrete. Well, that can mean other things. I don't know. I'm not that trendy with what's going on in today's culture for younger people, but that could be a STEM thing, rubber band. It's still something that's stimulating my hands in order to stay focused. But yeah, let's move on and talk more about these things. So how do you help? How do you help somebody that's stimming or even thinking about doing a behavior that might be problematic in some way? Be thoughtful that overstimulation or lack of stimulation, if it's distractful or harmful, work together with the individual to help substitute or reduce the behavior. So talk about the context. Think about the classroom environment. What exists there? How chaotic is it? Who do I have access to? What's the transition? Consider the backstory. Consider the lighting. Consider the medication. Those are what wonderful educators have done and put in supports to make that transition easier in some capacity, be it the safe space for a corner for however many minutes. And that's not sort of my area of expertise, so I'll leave it at that. But that's something that we all do in some capacity, right? It's not always a symptom of having autism. I'll have professors come and say to me, well, the person keeps disrupting my class and is out of context. Well, okay, we need to kind of consider the backstory. We need to meet in office hours in a discreet manner, if that's even something that the student wants to do, and seek out a diagnosis. But it could just be they're socially anxious. They might not have autism. But we've all stemmed, STIMMED. I thought it was STEM. In some way. This one I'm still really working on 15 years later. You ever talk with somebody that has autism who's verbal in terms of communication, and it's just excruciating the time in between understanding what I'm saying or processing what I'm saying. So if you're a fast talker, it's really tough, all right? But individuals with ASD have trouble processing information. Many of them do. It's not because they aren't listening to what you're saying, it's they're trying to comprehend the response. And if you ask me a couple different questions at once, I might delay my speech or just stop talking altogether because I'm still trying to think of something. So be patient. Here's the ally's way to be. Wait for a response. Be clear in what you're asking. I struggle with that too. Don't ask so many questions at once. When students would come and meet with me and say, hey, John, how's it going? What'd you do last weekend? What you got going on today? I think that was 4 questions. It's just like, I'm trying to show up on time, right? So wait for your responses, and just giving the information can be helpful, but knowing that processing speed is also often a symptom of having autism. It's not a lack of respect or lack of understanding. Okay, so give me some concrete meanings. Let's not use the idioms, or what's that, hyperboles, hyperboles? Where are my English educators?
Hyperbole.
He's got a truckload of money. What's that mean? Literally? Avoid them, educators especially. When we had, one time I had a kid taking a chemistry class test, and she said, one of them's covalent bond, one of them's savings bond, the other one's something to do with atoms. But the savings bond, I looked in my whole book and I can't find anything about a savings bond. Well, do a lot of young people know what savings bonds are? But that was a joke from the professor. It was a freebie. But it took 45 minutes for her to get that. And you wonder why we ask for extended time on exams. Right? Okay, so that's how to help. Is yours? Give me a second.
Rebecca, when I was teaching high school, I had a student who was on the spectrum, and as part of her learning plan, she had unlimited time for tests, as much time as she wanted.
Yeah.
And I was teaching chemistry, and I was like pained for her because she just wouldn't, she like would fixate on a question and wouldn't move on until she was just absolutely sure. And I was just like, it was exhausting, like
Right.
for everybody involved. And so I asked in her IEP meeting if I could copy her test so it was only on the front piece of the paper, so not front and back, and give her 1 page at a time, and give her, like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever, break it down. And that later she could go back and spend as much time as she wanted going over it, but I was going to ask her to move to the next page after 10 minutes. And the next time she took a test, she took maybe 20 minutes longer than the rest of the class, when the first time it was like a 6-hour ordeal. But that just really showed me like how simple of a modification can make a really big difference.
Absolutely. And the unlimited time is excruciating. I think typically time and a half is what's the law now through ADA. So if you know somebody going to college, have them register for services through disability services, because they can immediately have access to having their tests proctored in a quiet environment and having time and a half if they have the proper documentation. But you're trying to do the best you can. Just tell me how I can help, right? And so showing that in a visual way of here's one thing at a time truly was efficient. And that was just thinking outside the box, right? But what we can or can't do, I don't know much about IEPs besides reading them, for the purposes of eligibility typically for what I need in the classroom. But that social emotional stuff is typically not addressed unless you receive a clinical psychological in some way.
So Rebecca, does breaking tasks into smaller pieces, such as what was done there, is
Yes.
that also just in general something that's
Yeah.
very helpful? 'Cause-
Give me the to-do list.
and with ADHD kids, don't you just give them one task at a time?
Right, yes. So think about, Johnny, go clean your room. What's Johnny do? I clean my room. Give me the steps, give me the task list. In the residence halls, we'll have even social things. We had a visual that the resident advisor put up that was a reminder to put on your pants when you go in the lobby. Our young man thought it was his own living room. So when he's in home, he wears his boxers in the living room. When you're in Holderby Hall, that's not appropriate. So I needed that visual as a reminder. So the person did it for the whole hall, so it wasn't a stigma thing where we're just saying, oh, John, people knew he was the one without pants on. But he stopped doing it because he had that reminder. So it's the one thing at a time. We'll have check, did you call home, check your keys, check your phone. Same kind of checklist work outside of the home as they do in the home. But yes, I think it's a great example of needing to do one thing at a time. The ADHD piece is unique because that's sort of the fundamental of having attention deficit disorder. I can't pay attention very well, right? So I need to tell me what to do one thing at a time.
How much training do you do for parents?
Parents. It's a great question. Typically when I get to work with families, it's once they're moving out of the home. And so we do a lot of training at the West Virginia Autism Training Center through the whole state of West Virginia. So if you're a West Virginia resident and you're seeking out a diagnosis, their services are free. They do tons of different trainings for families and parents and individuals on the spectrum. Resources to the lending library, the Ruth Sullivan Lending Library is packed full of amazing information. So you immediately have access to that. But we do a lot of professor trainings. We do a lot of community outreach in terms of employers in training, doing this training truly. It's just talking about what autism is and how to best recognize it. Now we can fit it to the context to meet the needs of your family or whatever. If you have access to other businesses, we'd be honored to do this training. We have several different staff that can do it. But does that answer your question in terms of training for families?
I'm very interested in the connection between your program and the Autism Services Center.
Sure. So the Autism Training Center,
Training Center.
sure, I'll be happy to explain it now. The Autism Training Center, we're housed in Old Main Building, so on Marshall's campus. And that's the vision of Dr. Sullivan. You know, she knew Joe's gonna grow up, he might wanna go to college, so what if I like integrate the offices right there? Brilliant. It's a matter of thinking ahead. So she had the vision of that. We train families, right? Where the services center is more residential in nature, right? So if we need 24/7 kind of oversight and functioning, I've never worked for ASC, but that's the primary difference. We get confused a lot, but they have a new building down on the west end, used to be the BB&T Bank, and so that's Autism Services Center. Does that make sense? We can only serve West Virginia residents, but the college program that I lead, so at Marshall's program or Shepherd's program or Concord, most of our students are from out of state. Because of, again, the Googling autism in college, they're coming here because they need the support. They need this understanding of, we're all in the same boat. Well, what does that even mean? Right. Other questions? Did that answer your question? All right, in terms of the differences?
But let me ask you something. What is the word spectrum mean when you're talking about autism? To me, that means a wide, how do you know where you are on the spectrum or whatever?
So it used to be autism, classic autism. I got autism. I've got pervasive developmental delay, not otherwise specified, or I've got Asperger's disorder. 1, 2, or 3, that's the spectrum, that's the umbrella. So it was almost in terms of functioning seemingly, right? So we're gonna have a developmental disorder delay in some capacity, but the PDD-NOS is now no longer. But it was, I'm somewhere in that spectrum, but I don't know really where. But now you're looking at ASD level 1, 2, and 3. So the spectrum is wide, and because the challenges we've been talking about aren't overt in everyone. You're gonna see them subtly in some way. But it's hard to diagnose in my perspective, and again, I'm not a clinician, but that's what the spectrum means.
I can only imagine a teacher in elementary.
Right, yeah, and knowing the difference between substantial support versus reasonable accommodation. I get to work with a lot of disability directors, what's a reasonable accommodation? And there's laws around that, so we can talk through it, but does that answer your question about the spectrum? Okay.
But I wouldn't think everybody would fit in one spectrum. I mean, you think you would
Right.
just might be okay there, but not, you know, that I think it will be hard to put you some. Is it hard to put somebody in a?
Well, that's a great question, because the testing that they do for it, it's quantifiable. And so, you know, I'm typically reading the reports after, so we're looking at the folks with average IQs. But intellectual disability is very much so, can parallel the symptoms of having autism. Depressive disorder, a lot of people with autism might be depressed, might have other medical conditions. And so sometimes it's what am I dealing with today in terms of the diagnosis. But the core challenge of having autism, that's something that's neurological, so you're born with it, through the lifespan. We can adjust and learn new skills through the lifespan, but we're always gonna have autism. Just like we're always gonna have depression in some way, but it might ebb and flow in how you're managing it. Does that make sense?
It does.
Same with anxiety, you know, or other kind of conditions that exist, coexist. Okay, I'm gonna use the example we were talking about earlier of echolalia. This is just a fun story. Anybody recognize this character? I didn't know either. We had a student who was practically nonverbal, he's not, but he was a kid that didn't talk very much. He'd go to class, he'd do his thing, show up what he needs to do. But he was in an English class, and he just stood up and said, "I once killed a man with his thumb." So his peers and his English teacher immediately call us because they know that he's one of our students. And so we're like, whoa, that was strange. And so we Googled it. You know, that's what everybody does now, just figure it out. It's a scene from Ratatouille, the Disney movie. And that's what he likes to repeat when he's stressed out. He's never going to kill somebody with his thumb because he knows shame, right? But we don't know the context of what he was thinking at that moment during that English class, right? So our role then becomes find the root of the source. As an ally, I'm going to figure out what did you mean in the conversation. But repeating things that you've heard can be soothing, and they can really express how you're feeling if you know the person. I had a young man who was a chemistry major. He's since graduated, but he said, "I once poured silver nitrate on Caitlin." And he said this in his chemistry lab class, where there's access to silver nitrate. And I said, "Justin, why are you saying this?" And Caitlin was somebody he had a crush on in high school, and that's what he said when he was really upset. Well, the context matters. That's the theory of mind, right? The context matters. And so my role in his life was to say, when you're upset, you call me and say that, or you write it down, or you come to our offices after class, so that we can make sure that you're still dealing with that stress and anxiety, but not in the context of your chemistry lab. Make sense? Okay. Minimizing transition. Here's just a couple practical things if you're thinking about supporting people with autism. Prepare for that change in routine. What am I going to do if it rains? What am I going to do when the book's not in the library? When there's a 2-hour delay. A lot of students are like, yay, delay. People with autism, their routines change. It's terrible. Martin Luther King Day, any kind of Monday that's off, that's the change in the whole week. Time changes, in falling back or springing forward, those routines are changed. And so know predict that week's going to be a little bit different. And how can we prepare for that? With a visual, with, we might talk about sensory challenges as they change, because you can adjust for them. Take your tags out of your shirts if the tags bother you, right? This is what I really want to drive home today, though, because a lot of people that haven't met somebody with autism, or they know we're going to talk about autism, there's that fear factor. It's like, oh, let's not talk about the autism, especially culturally. I work with people from different cultures. Huge stigmas still exist. But many people with autism feel empowered talking about it. Let me just explain to you why I'm reading the book about World War II weaponry in German. Because that's my fixed interest, and it calms me. And it makes me stay focused. And I'm not thinking about what my peers are thinking about me because I have autism. I got to be a part of that meeting where he said that to his professor. And that's a whole new enlightenment for professors too. And it can be easier to just talk about it, but for some it's still very confidential. So what do? You still ask, right? Because they can be empowered by discussions on how they experience life. All right, so just fly away. And then I do want to share just a 6-minute video because I do think it shares a lot about the future of autism. I hope that we're getting pretty good at employing people with autism, but I know we've gotten a lot better in the past decade. So I want to open time for questions. We're looking, oh, it's only 11:30. So I'm going to X out of this, and then we'll jump into some questions. This is a result of some research in understanding what are the employment needs. Here's our website if you get to visit it, marshall.edu college program. We did some research on, hey, what are the top 11 things that you need to be in terms of preparedness for employment? This was a 1.5-year dissertation because we're kind of proud of it. But we developed this 3-day workshop as a result of it because employers were telling us, you got to know how to network, you got to have charisma, and so networking is really important. Well, how do you teach somebody how to network? Did you know what networking was? Right? And so the results showed that college students with autism don't know what networking is. Their top response, I think, was, well, I should have written, it's terrible, Beth, how many years once you graduate, but you don't remember the results of your own research. But it was more like the interview. The interview is important, and that's still very important. But this workshop is going to express kind of what we did in an effort of, now that we have this knowledge of people with autism aren't understanding tolerance in the workplace, they're not understanding how to be prepared for it in terms of their cover letter or their social media input and how that reputation plays a role in employment. So for the past 3 years, for 3 days in June, in Old Main, we've been doing this workshop for students with autism, and I'll just let the video speak for itself, but I'm hoping that it'll provide some resources for you to think about what we can do here in our community. Can you hear that? That's old. That's 159.
What I have is this anxiety that like something bad might happen or I might make a mistake that I would regret for the rest of my life.
The college program for students with autism spectrum disorder recognized for a long time now that we needed more emphasis in regard to transitioning from college into the workforce. What we've done is we created the employment workshop, which is 3 days of intense preparation for employment. Day 1, we look at the preparation for employment. In day 2, we talk about earning the job. And day 3, we talk about keeping that job. When we look at the research right now, we notice that employers are really looking for individuals to advocate and disclose their autism, yet knowing when to disclose and how is really challenging because of communication difficulties.
I want them to get a good first impression of me. With the connotations applied to autism these days, I get the feeling advertising it would kind of hurt my first impression.
Through the workshop, I think that they hear about their own individual choice of if they should and the legal surroundings about when you do the right time and how to gain the right accommodations.
Crucial inquiry you're going to need to figure out is, do you disclose during the interview?
So now they have a better understanding of when the most appropriate time would be, and most importantly, how to do it in order to gain the right accommodations they need within the workplace.
Right now, we have students leaving, and in the interview process, they kind of get fumbled.
Yeah, there's one thing I've noticed over the years from feedback I've gotten from friends is that I tend to be usually my own harshest critic.
I think almost any job interview you can expect with a high probability that your employer or your potential employer is going to ask you what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses.
Many times they haven't had the opportunity to ask questions directly to employers in a time where they can feel comfortable in addressing questions maybe they've always had but haven't had the right opportunity to be able to do it. So now that they have this safe place to be able to ask those questions to employers who could potentially be employing them one day, they're able to take that information and value it and understand what kind of preparedness skills they're going to have to tailor to within the workplace.
Research shows that a lot of individuals with autism actually are some of the most reliable and loyal individuals when it comes to the workforce, but they don't really know quite how to get there.
Networking is very important. Students need to learn to network from the time they are a freshman until they are a senior. So they have to learn to speak out, to reach out to people in their field.
I see it as reaching out to people and possibly as an attempt to make friends and meet new people that you've never really encountered before in your life. You get to know people. Those people can be a source for your skills.
Many individuals with autism have a certain interest or a passion for a subject or field, and if a job revolves around that, that's going to create a really intense focus that can create an increase in productivity.
The passion I feel for it will be enough motivation for me to learn all I can about it so that I can do well.
You have people of an average to above average intelligence. They're not going to engage in office gossip. If you tell them to take a 10-minute break, they don't take a 9 or 11, they take a 10-minute break. And there's a real specificity, I think, to their life. And you don't have that, but as an employer, that's a great interest to them. somebody that does have attention to detail, that will focus on the job at hand, that understands the expectations and will see them through. That's the kind of employee you dream of.
We almost need a mind shift on the side of the employer as well, where it's, rather than the first flag that comes up is, what are they gonna need? What do I have to provide? One of the first should be, I wanna know more about their deep and focused interests. I wanna know more about those things that they have really examined or spent hours perfecting and working on their lives, the things that they feel passionate about. I feel like if that can be just as an immediate question as what accommodations and supports might this person need, we can start to transcend some of that bias in the workplace. So over 3 days, you're going to take a lot of self-reflection and a lot of assessing where you're at in your moment. What are my skill sets? What are my desires? So in this workshop, you've laid a lot of that.
This helps people, with their own individual challenges, and it helps the employer with its challenges.
In the last couple of days, I've learned to have confidence and stand up for myself. I do feel better prepared for employers. Definitely take this workshop up.
Think about what you want to do next. Think about how it builds that story of your career and pursue it. Be prepared for some no's, and eventually you'll get that yes.
I would recommend this workshop to other people. You might get something out of it that you didn't know before.
This workshop is held every summer, and if you are interested in participating, or if you know somebody in your life that might benefit, please reach out and contact me.
Okay, so tell me what you all thought of when you watched that video. What'd you see? What'd you think of when you were watching the employment video? What's your first thoughts?
A little uncomfortable watching them try to promote themselves. I can't imagine the stress. But I see in the paper from time to time that they're looking for autistic humans. They actually are hiring because they do a good job doing their techie thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. Other thoughts, initial thoughts? I was thinking this guy has an FBI shirt on. I was like, great for that. Hired? Right? Yes.
I was thinking that all students could really get a lot of that.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. Because your typical college grad may not know how to network very well, right?
Right.
But they have those functioning skills, they have that charisma in some capacity because they don't have autism. But they still might not be as prepared or think about the types of things that we're talking about in the workshop. So yes, if you're interested in even serving on our panel, we're always looking for people that have employed others in any capacity to share their experience, because it gives folks with autism the one-on-one kind of chance to say, what do you expect of me in your company? We'll have, I'm not sure if many of you recognize Dr. Bill Bissett, but he has influence over a lot of people in our community in terms of hiring. And so we want to make sure that our students are making a good impression and bridge that gap between the diploma on stage, earn that degree, to now where am I going to live? We've got a lot of people in that gap between I had to move back home because I couldn't pay rent. I loved Huntington, couldn't stay there though because I'm not enrolled anymore. And so those kind of challenges we're trying to support through. We have a employment coordinator now, Dr. Hillary Adams, you saw in the video. We've hired her full-time now to support students that have just graduated or currently on track to graduate at all 3 universities. So that's really an individualized service that is so innovative. Needing that almost consultant of sorts to help someone find a job, but knowing the specific challenges that they have in terms of communication. And then while on the job, she can continue to work with the employer and educate them on, hey, Johnny might not get what the water cooler talk is. Let's explain it to him, right? Explain that when you take a break, how long a break should be, what you do, what your expectations are to being on time, how you dress, those sorts of things. Because the rigidity of many can also cause problems too. You know, the tattletale, the rule follower, the not rule follower. They get employed too. Right? They may or may not have autism. But I want to share one other video if we have time. And I also want to answer questions. But this high school summer transition program, just in case you do have folks that you know in your family or folks that we've talked about today that are in high school still, they're finishing their junior year of high school, entering their senior year of high school is where we like to first capture them. We even provide consulting services now to parents, just talking about these kind of things. I've spent many years interviewing people with autism and talking about everything from academic organization to personal insight to tolerance to independent living skills. And so we can provide those services too if you have use for them. But the high school summer transition program started back in 2008. It was a young man that ultimately went to MIT, but he called us because he said, well, just like the college program started at Lowell Austin, he was at a football parade up in Virginia and met Bobby Pruitt. And Bobby said, well, I've got 142 players. I guess I can take care of one more guy. So come on down to Marshall. Thankfully, we had the world-renowned Autism Training Center there. And so that's how I first figured out what autism was, is working with Lowell, piloting that college program. But I saw how those challenges translated from, hey, I'm going to talk to Bobby Pruitt because I love football statistics, and I can talk all day about football statistics. But how can I be a manager on the team to still get that social niche? He needed that liaison, and that was me. So that's how I learned a lot about his life. But we saw how the supports can translate from the home environment and your traditional K through 12 education, be it public or private, be it residential or not. We have a lot of folks that go to boarding school that transition to a public four-year institution. But this is the best time to catch them in our perspective. And this is just before it happens.
My name is Brian Fernandez. I'm from Great Falls, Virginia, and I'm transferring in this year as a freshman.
My name is John Coleman. I'm 17 years old, and I'm from West Palm Beach, Florida.
My name is Alyssa Fisher. I'm from Hurricane, West Virginia, and I'll be starting my freshman year at Marshall University.
I'm Matthew Kaiser. I'm a senior, and I'm from Michigan.
My name is John DeVore. I'm from Columbus, Ohio, and I'm currently a sophomore at Marshall University.
The program has allowed me to learn how to wake up in the mornings without falling asleep and sleeping through all of my classes.
It's really fun that you get, like, you're totally free to do what you need to do what you want.
It's just kind of giving me a buffer for actually getting into college, learning all the skills I need to learn, how to get the work done, how to manage my time, things like that.
And you'll get more attention considering there's less students down here in the summer. You'll get chances to hang out and meet new people.
Last year we went football golfing, kind of went downtown, a couple times. That was fun.
You get used to living in a dorm. You get used to living away from home. It takes a while, but you get used to everything.
The high school summer transition program really is an exciting time for students that have finished their junior year and are getting ready to begin their high school senior year to get a taste of what college life is going to be like. In our experience, many high schoolers have been through a lot through their middle and high school years, from bullying to social isolation to depression. And so being in a college environment provides that new level of autonomy and openness to recognizing that there are people there that understand autism spectrum disorder and how it affects your life.
You just find a graduate assistant.
My grad assistant has gone above and beyond for me.
I have a supervisor that helps me and help direct me to where I need to go. If I have trouble finding something, if I ever need help studying with a test.
She's already taken care of me when I've been sick.
Kind of there and available a lot of time, kind of like give you support, whether it's kind of like academic support or helping you navigate the social stuff.
The goal of the summer program is really for students to gain that new level of autonomy that comes with living in a college environment.
Getting up and going to a job is different than getting up, going to a class, and then going back to your room and having to sit down and work on an essay for 3 hours. They're very different things. And for me to learn that particular skill was very hard, and I'm actually starting to get a hang of it now.
I have some really cool new friends.
Well, it's really my first taste of living on my own and living in a dorm and making the right decisions is trying to make my stable life.
We really want for high schoolers to understand and feel confident that there is life beyond high school. And the summer experience really gives a good way for parents to see if students are ready for that next step. The college program provides supports in the areas of academics, social integration, and independent living as well. And so high schoolers are able to really get a feel for the dramatic changes that are about to happen post-graduation. And like I said, families can get a chance to know what areas students might need to enhance their skill set in, and what's really just going to be okay. The summer program has been in existence for about 7 years now, and each year we evolve more and more social activities to integrate into that 5-week experience.
So what are you doing this summer? I'm having a great time here, like that.
It's like they went to Florida too, it's awesome. Okay, so those are all the videos that I have, the information that I have to share, but I'm happy to answer questions. I think that's a lot of the best part of our dialogue too, yes.
How long is the summer transition program?
5 weeks. It's
5
always
weeks.
with Marshall's Summer Session 3. So when their calendar comes out, we align it with Marshall's Session 3. So it's 5 weeks, and it truly is, you're going to college. You're taking one class, which is 16 weeks worth of work into 5 weeks, so it's condensed. It's a 3 credit-hour course of your choice. If you haven't taken the ACT or SAT, then typically you can choose from communication studies, psychology is typically offered, sociology, history courses are oftentimes offered at that time. But yeah, so we're taking a class, we're starting college early, but living away from home is that main transition. I'm going to be in a residence hall for the next 5 weeks, and so the graduate staff that you see, that's the really the crux, the engine of the service, is who's my mentor? Who's my go-to person to understand what I need, be it laundry detergent, be it missing my cat, be it I didn't want to go to class, or whatever might happen. In addition to that, we have social activities 3 times a week. And so these are facilitated. You know, social things happen if you know how to socialize. You have the executive functioning of saying, hey, meet me for lunch at noon tomorrow. Folks with autism might just need that invite. And so oftentimes that's helped facilitate our understanding of social skill development within the community. So when you see laser tag, that's for a purpose. We're teaching money management. We're teaching patience of waiting on how to get in there. We're teaching Billy Bob's. Have you ever been there? It's a chaotic mess, but it's a lot of fun. And it's still a way to get away from the community. I'm teaching transportation. So those are the true, I think, ways that people are fulfilled through the summer program outside of the academic piece. We want that to be the understanding and baseline for what families can work on that whole next year while students are still in their senior year of high school.
You want to do this their junior, between the
Ideally.
junior and senior year?
Ideally, yes.
I think that's a huge transition from the family to the campus. That's huge.
And the
So-
pardon me.
I was just going to say, some of the things that you're talking about here, this is some of the things when I first started out working as a school psychologist, there was not very much training provided to us, and so a lot of my training was like on-hand training from Barbara Shavely, what have you, like this, and she was phenomenal, what have you, like this, when it comes to, you know, helping you to identify and to, you know, to work with kids, what have you, like this. But some of the things that you're talking about, social interaction, things like this, they used to take the kids and they used to go bowling with them, they used to do swimming with them, they used to take, and they used to go down to McDonald's or one of those fast food and teach them how to take money out, a cup of coffee, Coke, hamburger, what this is how much the day cost, because so they had to identify their money. So a lot of things that you're talking about here, there were some things that, you know, that we were already doing in the schools here, how to go and wash clothes, do things like this. I mean, the schools was set up, they're set up like that right now. Now, where they do a lot of that anymore, I don't know. It depends on what type of direction that the state's got the programs going in. But I wonder too, when you're talking about some of these things that some of these students are doing, I do know from previous experience and things, West Virginia was far ahead of a lot of states when it comes to identifying and to providing programs for kids because very few states knew how to do it, and we were, you know, and I used to go to workshops thinking I was going to learn something new, and we'd all sit there going, we're doing that, you know, we know what else, they gotta be doing something else here, but they was training people how to do this, so we
even
was.
have a whole technical assistance center now.
Yeah, and it was just, you know, so far ahead, and I just wonder with some of those students, have they not, you know, from whether they happen to be in their school had they not taught them how to do some of these type of things, which I think, like I said, somewhat practical, because we're doing a lot of those things here, or at least we used to, so.
Right. No comments or questions? The cost, were you about to ask about the cost? So the cost for the summer program for our college support is $1,500 for the 5 weeks. But that's in addition to their tuition and the room and board. And so the tuition is going to vary on in-state or out-of-state rates. And the room and board is typically pretty consistent. But those rates are online too. The college program itself in the fall semester and spring term at all 3 universities, the cost is $4,500 per semester if you're enrolled in the college program. And that's going to increase to $5,000 next fall. And the way that we're designed truly is we have 17 graduate staff to support the 50 students and a team of 9 full-time staff, which includes a counselor and student support specialist who serve as that liaison to parents. So sort of the way that that works is the student support specialist is that new go-to person that can then facilitate the services there, if that makes sense. They get updates, participate in the social activities, have access to counseling services, employment preparedness. So those are sort of what those fees go towards. We're actually going to be hosting, I want to mention this since I have the opportunity to meet a lot of local folks, but we're hosting our first gala, and that's going to be on December the 5th. We're going to call it Frosted on 5th and have it at the Marshall Foundation Hall. And so be looking out for that, saving the date. We're looking to raise more supports to move into the Tri-State MRI building.
This
is this coming year. Next year, 2020.
Yeah. Whoops.
Thankfully.
I was surprised.
But yes, truly, for those of you that do know the Marshall community, President Gilbert and Provost Taylor are truly supportive of our doubling the numbers of our supports within the next 5 years. And so increasing the capacity means we need additional space too. And that focus on employment is a struggle for all institutions of higher education. But how are we tracking them? How are we following people into employment and then helping them as they're employed? So that's where the fundraising for that's going to go towards. We're super excited about the potential move. So if you all are familiar with the old Tri-State MRI building, it was between St. Mary's and Cabell, had the machine there for many years. It's behind the HELP program, which is the HELP program is designed to help people with ADHD, dyslexia, learning differences. And so it's a natural kind of partnership there to have additional support for people with autism nearby. It's been an honor getting to talk with you. I'm happy to stay after and answer any questions too, but I'm sure many of you may want to head to lunch. But thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you.
Thanks, Becca, for your presentation. Really appreciate it and all of your work.